Greetings viewers, and welcome to a drizzly old morning on the Sunshine Coast. And welcome back to CoffeeChillTV for another one of my socio-economic, philosophic chats. And today, it's all about travel trends. Travel trends. Are you ahead of the curve? Let's get into it. And folks, before we dive too deep into today's talking points, what's my motivation? What's the impetus? I like to give the drivers, and there's two. One, once again, it's a rainy, drizzly old day on the Sunshine Coast. It's Saturday morning. I was hoping to visit a weekend market and do a little walkabout vlog, but I'm not going out in this weather. Secondly, I went for a little walk this morning with my umbrella, with my brolly, and whilst I was enjoying a lovely flat white coffee at the Drop Espresso Bar in Mountain Creek, I read a fantastic article, short but sweet, in the Weekend Australian, and it sort of prompted me to make this vlog. Let me tell you more about it. Okay, folks, so literature review. This morning I read an article, Weekend Australian, by Bridget Cormack, who is the deputy editor, apparently. This is the travel section of the Weekend Australian. The title of the article, Stay on Trend with the Trends. And it got me thinking, travel trends, Am I ahead of the curve? Am I behind the curve? Do I go against the grain? How about you? Let's unpack, explore, and expand. So let's start with the first couple in this article, pet-friendly travel. Now, I'm not surprised, but apparently 1 in 5 Aussies like to travel with Fido. Second trend is all around multi-generational travel and skip generational travel. Now, I mentioned multi-generational travel in one of my earlier vlogs where I spoke about companion travel. We'll come back to that today, and we'll also dig a bit deeper into skip generation travel. That's an interesting one. What about upgrades? According to this article, baby boomers, okay boomer, if you're watching, Gen X here, the boomers, they want to spend more money on a hotel upgrade rather than a flight upgrade. That's interesting. I think on a long haul flight. Is the hotel upgrade cheaper? I think in a lot of cases it is. Another trend in this article. 45% of Aussies surveyed in the research cited in this article, 45% would spend more for eco-friendly, culturally sensitive experiences. We'll get into that shortly. And finally in this article, they talk about the fact that up to 90% of Aussies struggle to regularly take holidays, and a fair chunk don't really take them at all. That's an interesting trend. We'll get into that too. As I fix my dodgy glasses, excuse that folks, I've got to go to the optometrist next week to get new ones. This one, it's gone. Hey, let's keep rolling. Let's rise above these issues. All right, folks, so I'm going to cite some other research later in this vlog, but let's deal with the article from the Weekend Australian first, and pet-friendly travel. 1 in 5 Aussies want to travel with their pet. It's an interesting one. I own a couple of properties that I rent out. One is a long-term lease and one is holiday home accommodation. Now, the holiday home accommodation has been historically marketed as pet friendly. And my property manager tells me that we get a fair chunk of action, people wanting pet-friendly holiday homes. In terms of the long-term accommodation, my current tenants don't have pets. I'm not surprised when I've never travelled with a pet. How about you folks? Have you travelled with your pet dog, cat, goldfish? Okay, it does provide some logistical challenges, and you probably limit your accommodation choices if you want to travel with Fido, mittens, when you do, but it's an interesting one. If I think about myself, I haven't done it, but if you don't go on holidays with your pet and you have a pet, what do you do with your pet? Now, for me, when we were growing up, we'd go on holidays and the next door neighbours would look after the dog. And when the next door neighbours went on holidays, we looked after their dog or their cat, etc. Okay? If you don't have that option, pet hotels. Now, I've never dropped off an animal at a pet hotel. I've heard mixed reports, some of them great. Some of my friends have dropped off their dog at a pet hotel and come back a week later and they reckon the dog was never the same. But hey, I'm not here to cast aspersions. It's not cheap either, pet hotels. So I can understand this trend. 1 in 5. Okay. What's that, 20%? So it's quite significant. What about you folks? Have you ever travelled with a pet? Would you ever travel with a pet? What's your take on this statistic? All right, multi-generational and skip generation holidays. Multi-generation, I sort of touched on this in an earlier vlog that I did, companion travel. And in that vlog, I spoke about destinations. For example, Bali. Bali is a multi-generational destination, and you will see grandparents, parents, and grandkids all on holidays at the same time in Bali. And it caters for different interests that are of more interest to certain generations over the other. So, I'm not surprised that multi-generational travel is a popular trend. What about skip generational travel? Full disclosure, I'd only come across this term this morning whilst I was finishing my flat white. Skip generational travel. So the grandparents grab the grandkids and off they go. Certain destinations, once again, will lend themselves to that type of travel. And I'm thinking, security, family-friendly tourist attractions. There are some parts of the world where I don't reckon skip generational travel works, but I'm not surprised that it's a trend. I used to be a retirement specialist, financial planner, and quite often when I was dealing with my clients, a lot of them were baby boomers. When it came to things like estate planning and legacies, they were more interested in the grandkids than their own kids. So I'm not surprised. It's an interesting one, folks. Are you a grandparent watching this vlog? Would you bypass the kids, your children, and go straight and take the grandkids for a bit of a holiday treat? It's an interesting trend. The next bit of research, upgrades. Flights versus hotels. I recently had a coffee with a mate, and him and his partner are on a big trip overseas again. And for the flight home, they've gone for a flight upgrade. I think they're going business class for the trip home. And I know a number of my friends over the years have done this. The night flight, 12 hours. They reckon it's worth every cent to upgrade to first class or business class. But this research in this article suggests that Aussie travellers, as a trend, are more likely to go for the hotel upgrade. And I've never had a successful flight upgrade in terms of a significant upgrade. I will invest in an exit row seat or premium economy, but I've never flown business class or first class as at the time of making this video. And the economics are that it's going to be cheaper most times to upgrade your hotel than it is to upgrade a long haul flight. So I'm not totally surprised by this. What about you viewers? Do you invest in hotel upgrades ahead of flight upgrades, or is it the other way around? Okay folks, we've got two more trends in this article. The second last trend is all about people who are, once again, spending more money. 45% of respondents apparently will spend extra for eco-friendly, culturally sensitive experiences. They will pay extra. The article doesn't say how much extra. The cynic in me suggests that some of these people might be virtue signaling. You know, they want to come home and at the dinner party tell their friends that they went on an eco-friendly tourism experience, that their travels were culturally sensitive. Maybe I'm being too cynical, but you know, let's look at the economic reality. Let's talk about a quick case study. Okay, culturally sensitive, environmentally friendly. You stumble into town. You're looking for accommodation. One room is $200 a night. One is $100 a night. $200 a night. You know, this is you know, the woke hotel grand. Okay, it's virtual signaling all over the place. It's telling you all about the energy efficiency and the recycling and the respect to local tribes and etc. It could be legit. It could just be for marketing purposes. Okay, are you going to spend an extra $100 a night, or does the filthy lucre rule? The ethical dilemma for some people. For me, I'm just a little bit skeptical about places that say that they are superior when it comes to being culturally sensitive. You know, eco-friendly experiences. In some cases, it's legit. In some cases, it's a marketing exercise, and you can be manipulated by marketing. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, the last trend in this article says that postulates that 90% of Aussies are struggling to take time off. They're struggling to take time off. I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all. You know, economic times are challenging all around the world. But, you know, in a practical sense, I can give you an example. You know, I worked in financial services for a long time in Australia, and yeah, there were times when, you know, I was right on top of everything, felt secure, and I was ahead of the curve in terms of targets and things, and I could take 2 weeks off and go to Bali, go to Phuket, without a care in the world. The last few years I was working in Australia, taking time off from work, your targets don't change. Your job security, maybe it's loosened up a little bit. You know, an example, going back to the 80s and the 90s, in Australia, long service leave was popular. People would do 10 years service and they go away for 6 weeks, long service leave. I worked with a chap who did this. He was in middle management. He went to Europe and the UK, and, you know, a trip of a lifetime with his wife. But when he came back, he was on the outer a little bit. You know, he wasn't getting invited to, you know, the committee meetings and the projects. You go away for 6 weeks and it affects your job security. What about my experience in other countries? So most recently, folks, before I retired several years ago, I was a full-time teacher in Thailand. And a lot of public holidays. So easy to manage those power weekends. You know, I was living in Udon Thani, full-time English teacher, and I would zip away to Khon Kaen and Nong Khai because, you know, there'd be some public holidays, and a lot of public holidays in Thailand. Great. we've got a fair swag in Australia, and a lot of Aussies will work their annual holidays, around April, May, when there's Easter and Labor Day and Anzac Day. And if you kind of work it right, you can take a minimal number of working days off and maximise the time you're away from the office. So I'm not surprised by that. But, circling back to Thailand, yep, a lot of public holidays. But here's the thing about being a teacher. And a lot of people say, oh, teachers get a lot of holidays. They do, certainly in Australia. But someone's telling you when to take holidays. Your holidays are very much a slave, in terms of the timing, to the schedule of the school. Okay? So when the school's closed, you can take holidays. But, you don't always have a time to have full autonomy over your holidays. The other thing in Thailand is that, unless you work in a big flash international school, in most cases the salary is pretty modest in Thailand for foreign teachers. And, you might like to get away, but the economics may preclude you from doing it. And finally, working as an expat teacher in Thailand, April, a lot of schools close in April. A lot of them, though, they close, but they still have summer schools. And the summer schools are a pretty cruisy gig for some teachers, because the amount of contact hours is less than a typical month working, but the salary is the same. So it's a little bit of a vexing question, in terms of my recent experience. In Australia, the last few years, working in financial services, it's tough taking substantial time off, just the pressures of the job. And in terms of working in Thailand as a foreign teacher, yes, the work pressures, no, nothing compared to working here in Australia. But the practicalities, you can't just take time off in the middle of semester, and two, it may not be worth your while to take a chunk of time off. What about you folks? For those of you who are watching this video and you are still working, is it a challenge for you to get time off? If you're retired like me, hey, this is one of the great things about retirement. You've got much more control over your time and movement, but maybe your cash flow is not as strong, as high as when you were working. Okay, folks. So another article, it's sitting on my laptop, and the source is Karryon. I'm going to put the details, I will backfill the details into this vlog. I'm just going to cherry pick two trends that they've identified in this article. The first trend is frequency. The second trend is planning. Let's expand. Frequency. So according to this article, Aussies are moving away from the big annual trip to shorter, more frequent holidays during the year. Okay, now the big trip, in Thailand, a lot of people talk about the 2-week millionaire. Okay, this is the person who's slaved away, pumping out reports for the boss, on the chain gang, on the production line, and voila, they go and hit Phuket for 2 weeks, and they spend like a drunken sailor. According to this article, people aren't going for the big splurge annual holiday so much as taking more frequent and meaningful holidays. What are your thoughts on that, folks? Are you someone who goes away for several weeks, a big chunky holiday, or during the year, do you break it up into smaller chunks? I'm more the latter. When I'm back in Australia, I'll go away for a week. In Thailand, maybe a little bit longer. They're sometimes shorter. But I don't do the great big, massive several weeks away trip anymore. Now that I'm retired, I used to, in my working days, when I was right on top of things at work, I could take 2-3 weeks off. Towards the end, I was very much taking frequent trips of shorter duration during the year. How about you? All right, the second trend I'm going to cherry pick from this article is all around planning. That Aussies are really enjoying the planning aspect. That the holiday starts well before you get on the plane or the bus. It starts before then, okay? Before you get in the car and you drive off somewhere. There's a lot of excitement and emotion around the planning. And, you know, I did a video recently on sort of organised travel versus independent travel. One of the great excitements of independent travel for me is the planning. I love researching places before I go and mapping out my little itineraries. And, you know, that trend doesn't surprise me. So, you know, the holiday starts, and people love Googling up and researching and before heading to a destination. So, yeah, I enjoy the planning. I'm not surprised by that research. Yeah, it's great too. It's part of the fun. It's part of the holiday before you even get on the plane, in my experience. Okay, folks. Second last source article for today's vlog. This one's from Flight Centre in Australia. The travel trends we're predicting for 2026. Okay, once again, I will put full details. I'll backfill this vlog. And they've got 4 major trends. And I'm just going to focus, I think, on one of them. Here we go. All right. So according to this Flight Centre article, here's their top 4 trends that they've identified according to what they think is going to happen this year, 2026. Number 1, 84% of our travel experts say the top concern of travellers is value for money. Not surprised by that one. 52% said seeking out unique experiences was second on travellers' list. Yeah, that's an interesting one, particularly in today's world of social media content creation. 50% put the bucket list at number 3. Yeah, look, you know, don't be afraid of the bucket list. I mentioned it in one of my earlier vlogs that, you know, Japan was on my bucket list, and people openly talk about their mortality, adventure before dementia, you know, places to see before you die. Not surprised that that's a motivation. And finally, you know, they talk about wellness holidays and set jetting. So that's an interesting one. I'm going to unpack the last one. Let's go. All right. Set jetting. It's all about setting the agenda before you get on the plane. So I sort of first came across this when I was in New Zealand many years ago. And, you know, they had a lot of Lord of the Rings tourism. Okay. Harry Potter tourism. Okay. People want to go to places where they were filmed. In Thailand, the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Beach. And in the end, the beach was kind of loved to death. Okay, but people kind of have that set as their agenda. And the other one is the wellness one, you know, the yoga retreat. Okay, so people have the agenda first, you know, then the logistics and locations follow the agenda. So I'm not totally surprised by that. You know, what are you wanting to achieve from your holidays? You know, then you get down in the weeds with the minutiae after that. And finally, folks, my last external source for today's vlog. This is an article from timeout.com written by Melissa Woodley. Australia's top 10 trending travel destinations for 2026 according to Expedia. Let's have a look down the list and I'll see if I can kind of fuse it back to some of the earlier discussions in this vlog. So folks, according to this article, the top 10 trending. Now trending doesn't mean the most popular in terms of sheer volumes, but you know, trending. Where's the curve going? The curve is in the growth phase for Aussies in terms of these locations. So what have we got? Nha Trang, Vietnam, number 1. Not surprised. I watched a vlog 2 days ago, it just popped up in my feed. This American vlogger was interviewing an Aussie, and I think he was in Ho Chi Minh. And he asked, where are you going next? And he said, oh, I'm going to go to Nha Trang. I was like, okay. I've been to Vietnam a couple of times, never made it to Nha Trang. Maybe in the future. So it's number 1. Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia next. Palau, Phu Quoc, Vietnam again. Hyogo, Japan. Khoi, Greece. Mallorca, Spain. Budapest, Hungary. Nadi, Fiji. Portland, USA. Now there's a smoky in the pack. I didn't predict that one, but the rest, I'm not falling off my chair. They don't totally surprise me. So guys, whilst we're on the Time Out website, and full disclosure, this is the first time I've come across it today. I'm going to have to be a more frequent visitor, I think, to this website. Not that I'm endorsing or disendorsing the content, but according to this other article, revealed the top 10 countries that Australians travelled to in the last 5 years, leading up to the end of 2025, and those that were the least visited by Aussies. Let's have a look at this list and see if it surprises any of you. All right, so visited is different to trending. Trending is all around search activity, etc. You know, initial bookings, etc. This is hardcore visited. Number 1, Indonesia. No surprise. I've been to Bali too. Singapore was red hot last year, literally and figuratively. I've been to Singapore many times. It's on the equator. It's hot, literally. But going back to that trend earlier about shorter holidays, Singapore, in my opinion, is tailor-made for the short trip. Okay? It's tailor-made for the short trip. And for Aussies on the East Coast, it's real easy. 7 odd hours, Brisbane to Changi. You're there, you know, 4 or 5 nights and you come home. It doesn't put too much of an impost if you're still working. It isn't too much of a time cost. It's not the cheapest place on the planet to visit, but yeah, I'm not surprised that Singapore is on the list. Next one, New Zealand. Yeah, once again, proximity, doesn't take long to get there, you know. United Arab Emirates, yeah, that's been trending upwards in the last few years. Yes, it's a layover destination for Aussies on long haul flights to Europe and places like that, but it's a destination in its own right. Fiji, yeah, you know, a lot of Aussie couples and families love Fiji. I've never been. The US of A is still there. Japan's on my bucket list. Thailand, number 8, down the list a bit. Malaysia, and number 10 is Vietnam. I expect the batting order will change over the next few years. I think there'll be a shuffling of the deck chairs. If I come back and do this video in a few years' time, I reckon those that list will change. It will change. Now this one, folks, counter trend. And I'll talk about going against the trend in a minute, but according to this article, here's some countries that Aussies are not going to. It's the least popular for Aussie travellers. And I'm not surprised, and we talked about security before, talk about how easy it is to get to somewhere, you know. So I'm not surprised, you know, El Salvador's on the list, Jamaica, Moldova, Senegal, Samoa. Okay, Samoa. Lithuania, Zambia. I've been to Zambia. Reunion, Bhutan, Burundi, Guatemala, Guinea, Turkmenistan. The stands. Have you been to any of the stands? I haven't. Luxembourg. I've been there. Yeah, just passed through quickly. Micronesia, Rwanda. I've travelled through Rwanda way back in my backpacking days. Bahrain, Republic of Congo, yes, I've been there. Zaire, Panama, Angola, Kyrgyzstan, another stan, Latvia, Mauritania, and Liberia. So, yeah, I haven't been to too many of those places. And they're at the bottom of the charts for Aussie travellers. But here we go, guys. When it comes to travel trends, some people enjoy going to places that aren't popular. Some people love to go to a place where people say, don't go there. That motivates them to go there. That is a trend in itself too. Going against the grain. What do you think about that one, folks? All right, so just to build on that last point about the least popular places versus the places that are trending and are popular. You know, I've noticed with travel vloggers, a lot of them try really hard to go against the trend. I think for the purpose of their content. They want to go somewhere that hasn't been saturated by people running around with selfie sticks and loading up the gram, the YouTube and the Rumble and the TikTok. Go somewhere off the beaten track, the hidden gem. And you know, yeah, I'm always curious to go to places that aren't as well known, but hey, I'm not afraid to go to places that are popular. There's normally a reason why somewhere's popular, okay? You know, some people try so hard to avoid the tourist trap. You know, that's their trend. But for me, you know, you are a tourist when you're on holidays. And, you know, I sort of address this issue in my slow travel versus fast travel. Because slow travel is a trend in itself, but, you know, folks that go somewhere off the beaten track, slow down, and they don't go to any tourist attractions, no places of interest. And maybe they've got some buyer's remorse when they finish their holiday. So, yeah, going with the trend versus going against the trend. A final couple of thoughts on that. So, folks, in one of my earlier videos, Motivation and Methodology, an Udon-Thani walkabout, I spoke about the travel trend, particularly amongst vloggers and bloggers, of chasing the shiny object, okay, the flavour of the month, okay, and you know, every year or two it changes, all right, it changes. Now, when I look at, you know, what I'm doing as a travel vlogger, and watching what happens there on Rumble and YouTube and Instagram, etc., you know, the last few years, shiny objects. There's probably two I'm going to isolate in Southeast Asia. Let's talk about them. Okay, the first one's in Indonesia, Lombok. Okay, now I've been to Lombok a couple of times, and you know, for a lot of travel vloggers and bloggers, they want to bypass Bali. They've never been to Bali. They want to go straight to Lombok. Lombok's the shiny object, okay? And, you know, some of them think they're like Marco Polos going somewhere that no one's been before, but I first went there in 1997, okay? But it wasn't on trend in those days, all right? So, yeah, people chase that shiny object, and Lombok in Bali is the shiny object, particularly that a lot of Instagrammers and YouTubers follow for the source of their content, I think, in a lot of cases, chasing the shiny object, the flavour of the month. And what's the next one? Well, I've been to Lombok 2 times in Indonesia. I've been to Vietnam 2 times. I went to Vietnam as a backpacker in the early 90s, and then I went back in the 2010s, you know, for a couple of weeks, nicely cashed up on an annual holiday. Both were fantastic. One was slow travel, one was fast travel. When I went in 1993, the bamboo curtain had just come down Okay, and Vietnam was not trendy at all. We went to towns where there were only 2 tourist hotels. Okay, these days it's super mainstream, and just based on anecdotal evidence in terms of my social media feed, it seems that Da Nang and Hoi An, they're on point right now. They're the shiny object. Okay, and you'll see a lot of vloggers and bloggers who maybe in the past specialised in Thailand. They're now skipping over to Vietnam, and it's a bit like the under-7 soccer match, where if you ever watched an under-7 soccer match, I have watched my nephew play many decades ago now, they all follow the ball. No one stays on side, everybody's offside. Everyone follows the ball. I've noticed with Da Nang and Hoi An, yeah, everyone's following the ball. And guess what? I'm a slave to the rhythm. I'm a fashion chaser. I've been to Vietnam 2 times before, and yes, I'm hoping to go back to Vietnam. Now, when I go to Vietnam, I'm hoping, I'd like to go back to Da Nang and Hoi An. They're both amazing places. But I actually want to go to Vung Tau, and I'm hoping to go to Vung Tau at the time of Anzac Day. Let me explain more, and it comes back to an earlier point on trends. Okay, so I want to go back to Vietnam, and yes, Da Nang and Hoi An, they're magical places. But I want to go to Vung Tau. Now, set jetting was mentioned earlier in this video. One of the things I like to do when I go on holidays is military tourism. I'm planning to go to Balikpapan, Indonesia in the future. My grandfather fought the Japanese there in World War II. I love going to places like Singapore, Fort Canning, Changi Prison. Really interesting military history. Siem Reap, the military museum in Siem Reap is awesome. And yes, I've been a couple of times, but I haven't been to Phnom Penh. I want to go to Phnom Penh as well for that set jetting. Once again, I like historical, particularly military history, travel. So, that set jetting trend, yeah, hey, I'm into it. And destinations in the future for me, like Vung Tau. Now, I've been to the cross at Nui Dat. Okay, I've been there. It's a great historical site, the Battle of Long Tan, high significance to Australians. Also, Anzac Day. I had a friend, he went there for the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Long Tan. Set jetting, okay? In Thailand, a lot of Aussies like to go to Kanchanaburi every year for Anzac Day. Set jetting. What about you folks? Have you got onto this trend of, but what's the agenda? What are my kind of areas of interest, my hobbies? Then the location and the timing of the holiday goes from there. That's the last trend for today. And yeah, that's a wrap. Travel trends on another drizzly rainy day here on the Sunshine Coast. I hope you're enjoying this video. Don't be afraid to jump in. Locations, trends, don't be afraid to opine and share your information and ideas. We welcome positive comments. But either way, cheers to you for making it to the end of this video. And we hope to see you again very soon on Coffee Chill TV. Thank you for watching.